Good afternoon. Just a few quick announcements before we get started. This session is being recorded today and will be posted online at a later date. The recording will be stopped at the end for question and answers, and we will be using those for an FAQ later on. There is a chat box that you can put the questions into, and those will be summarized by the host, myself, as well as my colleagues who are on the line today. Just know that all participants are muted to start, and we will maybe unmute you later on after the recording is stopped if we need to ask some clarifying questions. Please do have those questionnaires open that were sent to you on April 1st. They were sent to the grant award administrators, and we'll have some good information as we go through the training today. So just a few quick features of our WebEx platform to be aware of. First, as I mentioned, is that chat pod. There is a little image on the screen about how to locate that. You do and should have the option to send the chat just to our host, to one of the panelists, or to everyone in the session today. There are also some audio features that I want to point out here. In addition to the video, which most of us have turned off, and that's fine, there is a mute or unmute button. As I said, we'll probably mostly only use that during the question and answer session if you'd like to be able to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, we will take full advantage of that chat pod. I would like to introduce our host, technical host for today, Elaine, my colleague. And I have up on the screen right now her email address. We'll give you a moment to jot that down if you'd like. That's for any sort of issues where everything just kind of goes haywire. You can contact her offline via email. Otherwise, I would highly recommend that you use the chat. Send a chat directly to Elaine if you're having any audio or any sort of visual issues, and she'll be able to assist you. So, spoke a little bit about the chat box. Want to take a moment to practice it, make sure everybody can find it, that you can send the chat to all participants. So if you wouldn't just mind, please type in the name and the location, just the state abbreviation of your program, and then hit submit. I'll give it about a minute or so. Okay, excellent. A lot of folks on the line from all over the country, and I'm glad to see you all here today. All right, so a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. Let me just start with a quick introduction. My name is Erin Rhodes-Healy. I am the training and technical assistance provider, providing contractor support to OVC through the performance management team. I am also joined on the line today by my colleagues who you'll probably hear from later during the question and answer session. We have a variety of expertise on the phone with us, and we'll hopefully be able to answer all your questions later on. We are probably also potentially joined by some grant managers from OVC, and as well as my colleague Elaine, who's a technical host. The basic goals of our time today are to get you all acquainted with the performance measures as they are today, as well as provide an overview of the current reporting process. But the majority of our time today will be spent on the performance measures themselves, what you as the grantee need to incorporate into your agency systems and processes to collect the data. I want to address up front, this session is to cover data collection for the performance measures. This is not a forum to discuss the Just Grant system or get into any comparison of any legacy systems such as TIMS or PMT, for those of you who may have other OVC awards. So additionally, the guidance that I provide today is going to be based on what we know. And as many of you may have seen within the email communications, these are new performance measures. So our team has done all that we can to kind of highlight the key points, and further guidance may be forthcoming as we get a chance to see your data when it comes in and is reported. All right, let's get started with a big picture overview, just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what performance measures are and kind of a little bit of a history about how we got to where we are today. So what are performance measures? Well, they're a specific set of values or characteristics that measure the output or outcome of a grantee's activity and services and demonstrate the accomplishments of the program to the Office for Victims of Crime. Reporting ensures compliance with different types of legislation, such as the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993. And this helps show everything from federal agency accountability for achieving program results to enhanced congressional decision-making based on the data that you provide. So again, that data that you collect every day and report on quarterly contributes to these objectives. So getting into this a little further, how does OVC use the data that everyone reports? It's definitely a question we hear quite often from grantees. Well, OVC does a lot, from using your data reports, which get rolled up or aggregated with other grantees, to respond to data requests from the public, from Congress, to create national level reports. And here on this slide is some of the information, including another example of how OVC uses performance measure data, which is a desk review, a normal part of any award. This may be a place where your grant manager is going to use performance data to ask about goals or objectives, to understand your program further, and really get a sense of how the OVC funds are being distributed. You know, this may even also contribute to how OVC revises similar program designs and implementation strategies for future awards. So a little bit of the history of how we got here today with the performance measures. So since OJP is in the process of transitioning to the Just Grant system, OVC began a review of all its current human trafficking performance measures in early 2020. These measures collect data on services provided to human trafficking victims, as well as victim demographics. There are measures on training and partnership building and other activities performed by grantees. The goal of the review is to ensure that the performance measures demonstrate the diverse activities performed by grantees, and hopefully that they're realistic to report on and provide meaningful insight into how grantees are accomplishing the goals of each OVC human trafficking grant program. OVC grant managers and policy advisors have conducted a methodical review of each performance measure to determine if revisions were necessary. So again, these indicators were designed based on kind of like broader victim service measures, and some of them, if you see them in the questionnaire, may even be familiar to most of you if you maybe have had another OVC award or particularly a state VOCA grant. I also want to highlight that the new performance measures are a shift away from the old measures that were in the TIM system, which collected data at the client level. What you're going to see here is more at the aggregate level. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into each section of measures. So the same performance measures, well, what goes into a performance measure? Here on the screen, I have a general logic model, which gives you an idea of what goes into creating these performance measures and, you know, kind of like what we're looking for, how we, you know, choose to phrase things the way they are. So OVC performance measures consider things such as inputs and activities, which in turn produce those outputs and outcomes. several measures ask about program input, such as staff time and documents, training curriculum. And then the activities are the actions that convert those inputs to outputs and eventually result in measurable progress towards the program's goals. So these can include things like the number of staff trained, or the number of investigations if you were generally a law enforcement agency. Outcomes really, they speak to the longer term goals, kind of that more bottom line aspect, many of which you will write about in your semi-annual narrative report. If you've never done a semi-annual narrative, don't worry, we will cover that later in the training today. So we've talked, and we're going to talk more about what you as the grantee will be reporting, but since performance measures are important, I really do want to highlight that we have a team here to support you to do all of this. And outlined on this slide are the way that our team will support you as the grantee with understanding, interpreting, and reporting on your performance measures. Data collection will take time, and it will take probably a good, 2 quarters before you're really comfortable with these performance measures. But we will keep the lines of communication open to, do things like help ensure compliance with the Government Performance and Results Act. We want to really watch that accountability and achieving the program goals. So the data you collect every day and report quarterly really does mean something to OVC, and we want to make sure that it's done correctly. So I will be here as the Training and Technical Assistance Specialist to work with grantees through one-on-one calls. We will be doing additional webinars. We'll collaborate with your grant managers to make sure that the reporting is consistent. And we do also have that first point of contact, which is our OVC help desk. They will be available via phone or email, and they're kind of like that central hub to really collect and track any questions that you have. One thing to note, as when contacting your grant manager, when you contact the help desk, please have your award number available. It does make everything go smoother. So what does this mean to you as a grantee in your day-to-day activities? On this slide are some important actions that you will take, which combined will get you from pulling the data together within your agency's systems or processes through reporting and on to analyzing those outputs and outcomes of the activities, which demonstrate the accomplishments that you've achieved through your award. So eventually, what we're hoping is that you'll be able to kind of analyze your own data and use it as part of a future grant application, or say a report to your board of directors, your tribal council. So I want to highlight this because I want you to keep this slide in mind. I'll be referring back to it in the next section when we talk about the performance measures. Specifically, we're going to try to highlight what you need to collect and those different points that you're going to need to report and analyze. Okay, now let's drill down into each topic area of the performance measures. All information you report on, I do want to point out, should only pertain to grant-funded activities within the scope of the award. If you're not sure what that means, I would highly suggest that you start with your solicitation for those specific activities, as well as your funded proposal. Please note again that these are new measures and we will provide guidance based on what we know today. Again, as your data comes in and it's aggregated, basically rolled together with all other grantees, we'll learn a lot more. When you submit your data, it does matter. So please note some of the guidance as I'm going through this will feel a bit vague, but again, these measures are going to be reported on by different types of programs, and there will be opportunities to kind of explain or refine that data within narrative-based questions. Something will say like, please explain, or there'll be opportunities in your semi-annual narrative report. And also again, to ensure that you're creating consistency in the way you're reporting, If you have any questions about them, please do ask our help desk, myself, your grant manager. It's better to ask these questions sooner rather than later so that we can ensure that you're reporting consistently quarter over quarter. Each topic area of the performance measures will have two basic types of questions. Baseline, or activities that occurred prior to the award becoming operational, usually that quarter just prior to the award starting. And then current quarter questions. These are the more standard performance measure data questions that you'll be doing the data collection on. And you'll kind of see those indicated in the questionnaire where we say things like, indicate a number or total or please report. There are also, as I mentioned, some narrative or text-based questions. And you may also hear me refer again to that semi-annual narrative report. Those, again, are going to be that key opportunity to really kind of refine the data that you're reporting. And then we will cover that semi-annual report as well as the different types of reports in our next section of the training. So understanding what performance measures you need to collect and report on begins with the solicitation. OVC selects question sets and topics that best align with the activities associated with the award. From the solicitation, OVC performance measures are grouped into what we're calling like topic areas, or you may hear the term question sets. For human trafficking victim service providers, those question sets are located here on this slide. You'll notice that there are basically 6 of them. I do have victim services there as a specific bullet point because even though you'll see that under the trafficking population section, that is a significant portion of questions for you to answer. So I do want to kind of call that out as its own separate section. Now, regardless of which of these particular topic areas you are assigned, everyone is going to answer the same first question every quarter. And that question is here. Was there grant activity during the reporting period? So activity involves execution of the goals and objectives outlined in the grant application. So for example, purchasing equipment, hiring staff, planning events, activities, and so on. Some examples may not necessarily qualify as activity, like checking prices or putting together a proposal for a vendor, or communicating with a vendor. If you're not really sure if grant activity met the level to report a yes or a no, particularly for that first reporting period, and I know that some of you on the phone may have an October 1st start date, others may have a May 1st start date, please do run that by your grant manager, and they should be able to kind of give you some guidance on that. So reporting no to this particular question indicates that activities proposed in the grant application did not occur and no funds were spent during that specific reporting period. And again, this may be necessary in kind of that first and last reporting period to indicate that no funds were used. You will notice when you go to do your reporting that, if it's no, then you will not need to complete the rest of the questions. All right, so let's get started with our topic areas. Before we dive into this, and I do want to note that kind of how I'm going to move through each of these sections. I'm going to start with a summary of the performance measures, particularly something like trafficking population. There's a lot of performance measures. I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights here. And then what I'm going to do is have a couple of slides that are going to say things like stop and review. This is a place where we're going to have some suggestions of points and items that you're going to want to validate, basically perform a check on before you submit your report. These are going to be suggestions of things to check to make sure that everything lines up correctly, that your totals make sense for example, your services in relation to the number of individuals served that particular reporting period. And also that those items match what you have in your agency records. Trafficking population, you will notice there is no baseline measure for this particular topic area. Again, on this slide is a partial summary of the data that you're going to need to collect for the trafficking population section. All of the actual measures are listed out in the questionnaire you received prior to this training. And this is kind of an opportunity really for you to kind of step back and see if you can get the forest through the trees. Compare this summary of measures to your agency's data collection systems or processes to ask things like, do we capture demographics? Do we capture demographics in a similar way as what's on this performance report? Do you capture country of citizenship? Do you have a line that may include for the different types of service categories? Do you have a line that's going to be able to identify if this is a new individual served? And when I say new, that is a person that you're reporting as served with grant funds for the first time during that reporting period, regardless of the number of services that they were provided or the number of victimization types with which they presented. I do want to highlight here that all individuals are counted as new during the first quarter of the award, because it's the first time that all victims are being served with these particular grant funds. So as I mentioned, with trafficking population, there is quite a few measures to cover. So on this particular slide, I have some more of the measures summarized for you to look at. And I wanted to highlight these a little bit differently because while there are performance measures that are related to the individuals or the victims that are served, there are also a whole series of measures related to eligible family members. So please refer back to your solicitation if you need to know how to define eligible family member and if you need to actually report on them. Finally, I would like to call out on this particular slide the service categories, which were not on the slide before. We're kind of going to go a little further into those. These are the general categories where you start. You'll notice in the questionnaire that there are also additional subcategories. This is where you're really going to get into kind of the meat of reporting those services. And when I see services, like, for example, this is a place where you would report a human trafficking client that receives services with grant funds used to support legal services for a family member to apply for a derivative T visa. So I really want you to look at these services and the subcategories and make sure that you're really capturing all of that for the victims as well as for family members. On this slide, I want to try to break down and highlight a few things for you. First, one of the things that I want to call out is that it's up to you as the grantee and kind of any funded partners that you're working with to determine that someone meets the federal definition of a victim of human trafficking. You don't have to have any sort of like identification by law enforcement. There's no certification for that, but it is up to you to kind of make that judgment call. Victimizations and demographic information such as age or gender are self-reported by the victim, and there are some specific instructions I want to call your attention to for citizenship. So for the citizenship questions, you want to report on the top 5 most common countries of citizenship that are reported to you, and then the number of victims served per country. So I also want to point out too, because of the way things are grouped here, when you see that there's going to be some reporting based on victims of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and then both sex and labor trafficking, you're going to feel like you're answering the same question multiple times. And in fact, you are, but you really need to make sure that you're being careful to only report those, again, where sex trafficking is present, where only labor trafficking is present, and where both sex and labor trafficking are present. That last set of measures I spoke about ask for a count of new potential and or confirmed victims. And I want you to note that, again, that last category is mutually exclusive of those who experience both forms of trafficking. It's not just the sum of the individuals in the other two categories. And again, just a reminder, all individuals are counted as new in the first quarter of the award. I know I've mentioned that phrase a couple of times, confirmed and potential. On the screen right now is the definition. This does also exist in your questionnaire. I just wanted to call it out because it is in both places, so you don't have to frantically write anything down. You already have this to refer back to. So let's take a moment to step back and kind of offer some items that you can stop and review. So when I mentioned before that there are places where you want to check your totals, then on the screen right here are a couple of those key places that you want to watch for. So you want to watch, first of all, to check the total victimizations for all individuals served plus anonymous contacts, kind of put that all together when you're comparing those to, say, your services provided. So if you have, fewer services than individuals reported, there may be something a little off there. You also want to check those demographic totals because that is going to be something you have to report for the new individuals. So you really want to make sure that each of your demographic areas, like the age, the race, country of citizenship, that those totals, again, add up to the number of new individuals, because that's definitely some place where things can get a little bit thrown off. Also, if there are any please explain, like if you choose other, it's going to say please explain. Please make sure that your explanation aligns to that particular category. Let's go a little further into those items that I just spoke about that you should be stopping to review. I understand that, looking at these on a slide, it can get a little confusing. So that's why I really want to kind of highlight what I'm saying about the differences here, as you can see on the right, between category. So the category of those lines in green, information and referrals, a category, personal advocacy and accompaniment, that is a category. Underneath those, that's where you see the subcategories. So that's your 12A1, information about the criminal justice system, 12A2, information about victims' rights. And this is definitely also a place that you want to check that you're collecting and reporting totals that match or make sense. This is the place where you're going to report on those services like the ones that I just mentioned, a human trafficking client where grant funds are used to support legal services for a family member to apply for the derivative T visa. So I do want you to really take a moment when you're doing your report to watch these and make sure that your subcategories, again, it's your 12A1, 12A2, that the number of occurrences is greater than or equal to the total number of individuals for that category by itself. Same thing for family members. The tricky part, and again, please, contact the help desk, let me know, we can talk this all through, is you also want to add up the total individuals per category. So that's those green lines. So if you have 10 individuals reported in 12A, information referral, 10 individuals reported in 12B, personal advocacy and accompaniment, you want to make sure, again, that adding those categories up is greater than or equal to the number of individuals who receive service plus anonymous contacts for that reporting period. And you'll see that in the questionnaire where it says key performance measures. All right, let's move on to partnerships. So again, I want to remind you that all the information that's reported should only pertain to grant-funded activities within the scope of the award. And this will kind of affect how you approach data collection and reporting for partnerships. As an example, because if you have an OVC award to deliver, for example, housing services to human trafficking victims, you as the grantee shouldn't be reporting on other partnerships that your organization maintains with another unrelated community organization, for example, youth mentoring. Remember, this is just related to grant-funded activities. If you're unsure what relates or what is or is not a reportable partnership, please do reach out to your grant manager or to the help desk. We will talk you through it. Again, better to have the conversation earlier in the performance reporting process cycle than later on when a report has to get sent back for corrections. Here is a summary of the partnership measures. As you can see, there is a baseline question asking for the number of partners participating in any initiative prior to the grant funding. So again, this is where we're going to really make sure that you're looking at the goals and objectives of the award. For many of you, there may have been an existing partnership for a very similar type of work just prior, or if this is the first time that your organization is doing any sort of work like this, that baseline may be 0, and that's fine. We really want to make sure that you're looking at it specifically for your grant-funded activity. So I want to take a moment here to talk about some of the measures because there are subtle differences. First, you're going to see that total partners in the second bullet here on the slide, which is the sum of partner agencies and sub-grantees. So that's kind of like your funded, as in those that you're giving a portion of your grant funds to, plus you're not funded. That is a really, really key difference to know, because the first bullet is usually kind of going to be a smaller number. Sub-grantees, those are the people that are getting a portion of your funds. You have a formal sub-grant agreement in place. That second bullet really is where you're going to kind of count everybody. So this may be another agency that you partner with, but you have an MOU or a letter of support, but not a formal subaward. There is a subtle difference. That second bullet is usually going to be a larger number than the first bullet. The other measure that I want to point out is the rating of partnerships. So this one asks of an organization involved, rate each based on the following statement: this partner is actively involved in the program. Defining actively involved is at your discretion as the grantee. So suggestions for what an active partner looks like can include things like attending a lot of meetings, contributing meaningfully to the accomplishment of the award and any sort of team goals, demonstrating dedication to serving victims of human trafficking. So on other grant-funded programs through OVC, we often get a lot of questions about what do you mean by, sub-grantee or other partners. Well, I have a graphic here that often tends to help folks kind of look at the formality of those partnerships and sort of see where everything kind of fits together. And again, that number of sub-grantees is usually going to be a smaller number than all of your partners. So kind of all of your partners is that blue, purple, and green together. Again, the sub-grantees is just that little blue circle there. Partners that fall into that green or purple section may be very involved. That involvement, again, may be based on an MOU, for example, or a letter of support, but there's no real kind of funds given to them. In the previous section of this presentation, I'm going to call back to that slide where we talked about those action steps and what you should be looking at in, particularly in real life as a grantee. I want to point out the partnership measures because this is really a great place to connect the analyzing of your data with the semi-annual report narratives. Because often, again, you're going to feel like you're reporting a very small number, but these partner agencies, they really do a lot of work. So that's going to be the great place to kind of highlight the activities and the accomplishments of those partners, particularly if they're not funded. Another thing you want to do is, because there is a baseline measure, look at what you've just reported for that current quarter. Has the numbers changed? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Are things kind of going in a direction partnership-wise that you were expecting? Also, have you validated the number of partners that are listed as receiving grant funds? Again, thinking back to those other slides where we talked about, a desk review, and could you be able to kind of tie all this together? Okay, let's move on to training. So I just want to make sure, again, that we're clear, particularly, training is another place where you want to make sure that you're capturing all the information that pertains to the scope of the funded award. This is definitely a key point for training. Again, if you're not sure what training falls or does not fall within the scope of the award, please double check with your grant manager. So as you can see here, there is no baseline measure for training. And I have the basic topic areas summarized on the slide right here. And I do want to highlight, as we go a little further into this, that there is going to be a bit of a difference in the numbers that you report relate to individuals that have attended training, but there is also a section that does talk about the actual course curriculum. If that's, again, something, if that was an objective, that's part of your award to do. Few things to highlight here when you are doing your data collection around training. So we're going to go a little bit further here with some more information around how those performance measures shift focus between those who hosted the training and the participants that attended the training, and then finally to any sort of materials or curriculum that was developed. So you want to make sure that you are collecting any training data and ensure it's trackable by these particular categories. Those participant types are going to be unique to these human trafficking performance measures. So for example, things like legal service providers, victim advocates, court, media. I want to call that out again too, to make sure that these types of things are something that you can think about working into your agency's systems or data collection processes, because it will definitely make it easier when you get to your quarterly report. You're not trying to kind of translate what your agency has versus what needs to go into the OVC performance report. Here on the screen is, on the right-hand side, I have some items highlighted from the questionnaire to kind of show you what I've just been talking about the way the measures kind of will go into asking about individuals that attended a training conference and the different, types of questions that will go along with that. And I do want to highlight here that many responses, and you do need to read the instructions carefully, may just want a yes or a no question, but some actually do want a whole number. And again, 0 is acceptable if that's the correct answer for your particular award or agency. And you do want to make sure to track and report data on the applicable sections based on activities from the reporting period. So, for example, in this first reporting period, you may have a whole bunch of individuals that attended a conference hosted by another organization, and then you may not have anyone attend another conference for a couple of quarters, so these answers may be 0 because you're working on developing a training curriculum yourself. So just make sure you're watching those applicable sections. Here are some additional points that you want to consider validating or reviewing and checking before you submit your performance report. So the tips that I kind of have on the screen can help you increase thoroughness, accuracy, and consistency of your performance measure data. So you want to look at that raw data for each quarter and try to do a quick calculation. The number of materials developed or revised reasonable given the number of trainings your organization hosted? Do you have any sort of feedback from participants that could be summarized on that semi-annual report? These training measures are really a place where your activities are getting converted into outputs. And this really can help support those longer term outcomes and measurable progress towards the program goals. Strategic planning is a very short section, and there's only a few grantees to which this applies, so I'm just going to highlight it very briefly. The screen here, if you are assigned this particular set of performance measures, you will notice that there is a baseline performance measure to answer. And then there are, in that summary, those are the current quarter measures that will be answered. Deliverables, for example, they may include things like a report, a website, or a training event, something where there's kind of a more tangible output. And again, if you're assigned this, just make sure you're watching those bolded words and you do the reporting when a particular initiative is actually been implemented or when that deliverable is actually completed. Again, if you're assigned this particular set, please do watch as you're collecting and tracking things that there's a section on written policies, and there is very specific instructions about when to report yes and when to report no on a particular written policy or protocol. And you do also want to make sure that if you're assigned this particular set, that if you're reporting on initiatives, that you're reporting on those that are clearly defined or may even be redefined initiatives. Work with your grant manager if you're not really sure what those initiatives are, or we will talk about another opportunity to also find out where your assigned question sets are later on. Community outreach, this is another short topic area, so I'll just kind of highlight these quickly as well. All right, again, there's no baseline here, and this is really quick how often the organization is involved in community outreach activities. Just a couple of things to consider when you're kind of doing a validation or you're reviewing and checking your measures. Just look at, again, how many meetings are reported as monthly or quarterly. Do you have some sort of, backup within your agency records that maybe during a desk review you could help to validate or show how you came up with what was reported? If you have these community outreach activities, this is again something that really you can define further in those semi-annual narrative questions. I have talked about semi-annual narrative questions a lot, so let's take a moment and actually go over what that is. So here on this slide are the 6 basic buckets of types of questions that you're going to see on the semi-annual narrative report. Again, for those of you who have other OVC awards, particularly Transforming Victim Services, this is going to look very familiar to you. And a lot of us really do kind of lean on these questions because they are a great space to describe significant events or things that have happened or the work that your partners are doing. This is also a place to kind of detail any challenges. So remember that when you're writing your semi-annual narrative questions or when you're looking at these, they are based on just that 6-month time frame. It's a snapshot in time. When you're writing these questions, it's not about the entire award. So your answers probably will and should change from semi-annual to semi-annual report. So a few quick tips here when you're considering how to write out some of your semi-annual answers. Think about, particularly when you're writing about the objectives that you want to work on in the next 6 months, when you're looking into the future, think about making some SMART goals. I have SMART goals that are summarized here on the screen, kind of what a SMART goal is. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, but just want to kind of bring that up because it can be really helpful when you're thinking about your semi-annual report. I know everyone's got a lot of questions about reporting, so let's dive into it. We've covered a lot on the performance measures, or kind of that data that you need to collect within your agency systems or processes, but kind of what does that next step look like? How do you get that data to OVC? How do you share it? That's going to be done through a report. The performance report in this case is, in this section, is something that I'm going to outline. There are several report types, and the process that I'm about to talk about is specific to these FY20 awards, and it's the current process that's in place, and it will change a bit when the Just Grant system is fully functional to handle performance reporting. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all in advance for your flexibility and your understanding during this time of change. Again, your grant managers and my team, we're here to work through all these reporting challenges with you, and don't worry, we'll get there. There are a couple of different report types that I want you to be aware of, whether this is in an Excel document or if it's in Just Grants, whatever it is. There's going to be some basic types you're going to look at, and they are listed here on this particular slide. The quarterly report is what we just covered a lot of, and those are those topic areas, those question sets, the performance measures. Then there is the semi-annual narrative questions, and it's important to know that the first reporting period and the final reporting period, again, those reports may look a little bit different. There is also one other that is a final or closeout report, but as an FY20 grantee, you're just getting started, so we will deal with that when it comes up. On the screen here is a summary, again, of the current process as it exists today. So you will be getting an Excel document to report all of your performance measures in quarterly. You will be receiving this document probably in early June. You will fill this out with as much data as you can going back to October 1st of 2020. That's when most of your awards started. I know a few of you may have a May 1st start date, so you may need to go back a little further. This is where you really want to pay close attention to that question one. Was there grant activity? Was your, and that can relate to, budget approval. Really pay close attention to it. You're again going to report on as many performance measures in all of these quarters where there was grant activity as best that you can. We understand again that this is new, but we want to kind of get things moving. And again, I do want to note that this process will change when Just Grants is fully functional for all performance reports. So I know I've been referring a lot to your solicitation, and that'll tell you kind of which of the different topic areas or question sets that have been assigned, kind of to make things a little easier. And I will send a copy of the solicitation map out to everyone that's on the phone today with a thank you email, probably tomorrow or Monday. And a copy of these slides will come with that thank you email as well. What we did is kind of try to pull everything together a little bit and try to make like a little cheat sheet for everyone. So the solicitation map should list out all of the solicitations as we know them right now. And then as you can, this is just a snapshot. This is an example. This is not the full map, but it'll kind of give you a sense of, based on the award name, you know, what are the different topic areas or question sets that you will be reporting on, as well as the reporting system. So the full map that you'll get will have some older awards on it. And again, some of those older awards, if they're FY17 through FY19, in case any of you have those older awards, they'll indicate whether you're reporting in the TIM system or in the PMT system. This is the reporting schedule. And I want to highlight, this is the reporting schedule that we're going to ask you to work with. So normally the year is divided up into 4 quarters or periods of grant activity. During the month after the end of a reporting period is when we suggest that you create your Excel report, regardless of whether or not it's due to be uploaded into JustGrants. So you will notice January 30th, technically, I know there was a recent extension, and July 30th. So that July 30th, that's going to be your next time to be uploading your Excel document and doing the performance, semi-annual performance narrative questions into the JustGrants system. So then moving forward, we really do want to try to encourage you to do your reporting quarterly to keep up with these reporting periods so that you don't end up getting stuck with trying to pull everything together. And again, if you have these questions, as they come up about the performance measures, please do reach out to myself, to the help desk, to your grant managers. It really is better to ask questions sooner rather than later so that it can help with the reporting consistency and you don't have to find out that you were off base on something because a report gets turned back to you. All right. So last slide that we have here, this is, I've been talking about our help desk. This is the help desk contact information. Again, we will be sending out a copy of these slides, so no need to frantically copy this down. This information was also in the initial email for the training registration. And we will definitely be happy to kind of make one-on-one appointments with you if you do want to take some time to go over the performance reporting. So we have now concluded our content, and Elaine, we can stop the recording.